Hello, Tim.
Hello, Glenn. Simon.
Hello,
Simon.
everybody.
Hello, everybody. Hello, James. Hello to everybody.
Hey, hello.
Oh, can they see us?
Yeah, they can see us. I've got the mic on now.
Hello, Tim.
We wanted to
Hello,
see
Pat.
James
Lovely
Diggle.
to see you.
Hello there,
Oh,
Simon.
Simon.
Lovely to see you. How are you?
Hello, Pat.
Oh,
Hello, everybody.
Hello,
Hi.
everybody. Hello, James. Hello to everybody.
Worth it already. Just
There's James Diggle.
yes. He's moved now from one corner to the other.
Hey, hello.
Oh, can they see us?
Yeah, they can see us. I've got the mic on now.
Hello, George.
Okay, well, it's always an interesting moment, isn't it, when 120 classicists cluster, or not only classicists, obviously, all sorts of people from all over the world, cluster to on Zoom and say hello and greet each other like old friends, the old friends that they are. So it's very nice to see you all. Very nice to see even those people that I can't see because they haven't got their cameras on. But you're a very warm welcome to what will be, I'm sure, a splendid evening. This is the third of our Greek dialogues series that we're holding this year in the Cambridge Centre for Greek Studies. They're going from strength to strength, and this is a really historic one, actually, because as James will tell us, the Cambridge Greek Lexicon has been long in the making, and it's just about to come out. And I'm sure we're all dying to hear what James and those others who've been involved in it. James has obviously been involved in it right from the very start, but what he and his team have come up with and what moving beyond LSJ has actually meant for them. So let me pass over to James.
Thank you, Tim. The story of the lexicon begins with John Chadwick. As a young man, he served for 6 years on the editorial staff of the Oxford Latin Dictionary. In 1952, just after he'd been appointed to a lectureship in Cambridge, he heard a talk on the radio by Michael Ventris, who tentatively announced that he had deciphered Linear B and that he believed that the script was an early form of Greek. Chadwick was the first to write to him to offer his congratulations. He also offered his help, describing himself modestly as a mere philologist. Ventris invited him to collaborate on the publication of the decipherment. After Ventris's early death, Chadwick became and remained the leading figure in Mycenaean studies. Today, the names of Ventris and Chadwick are linked in the minds of classical scholars by the same inseparable bonds which link the names of Liddell and Scott. Towards the end of his life, he returned to lexicography. He was appointed to a committee overseeing the publication of a revised supplement to Liddell and Scott's lexicon. This prompted him to write his final work, Lexicographica Graeca, published in 1996, in which he demonstrated some of the inadequacies in the content and method of Liddell and Scott, by examining around 80 words and showing how the job could have been done so much better. So what is Liddell and Scott? The original lexicon was published in 1843. It has been continuously revised. The last edition, the 9th, was published in sections between 1925 and 1940. Revised and augmented throughout, as the title page has it, by Henry Stuart Jones. Hence the acronym by which the lexicon is generally known, LSJ. A supplement was published in 1968 and the revised supplement in 1996. Meanwhile, in 1889, an abridged version was published, the one in the middle. And this is to play an important part in our story. Known as the Intermediate Lexicon, this was based on the 7th edition of Liddell and Scott, published 7 years earlier in 1882. This intermediate lexicon has been continuously in print for 140 years and has never been revised. And yet it remains the lexicon most commonly used by students in English schools and universities. There is also still in print a smaller abridged edition, the one on the right, based on an even earlier edition of Liddell and Scott. So here they are, shoulder to shoulder, the family of three, Little Liddell, Middle Liddell, and Father Liddell, sometimes known as Great Scott. In 1997, John Chadwick proposed to the Faculty Board of Classics that it should oversee a project to revise the intermediate lexicon. The Faculty Board agreed, and in the following year, it formally established the Greek Lexicon project, with financial support from John Chadwick and other sources. Anne Thompson, who'd been a pupil of his and had later been assistant to the editor of the revised supplement, was appointed as the lexicon's first editor. Professor Pat Easterling was appointed to chair a management committee, and I was appointed to chair an advisory committee. It was hoped that the project might be completed within 5 years. This, remember, was 1998. So why has a project designed to be completed by one person in 5 years taken 24 years? For some of its duration, occupied 5 full-time editors, necessitated the raising of huge financial support, and for the past 15 years or more, taken over my life. Before I answer that question, let's consider how you might go about producing a new dictionary, not just a dictionary of Greek, but of any language. There are 2 ways. The most economical way, plan A, is to base yourself on what has gone before, and then correct and supplement it. That was the method of Liddell and Scott, and then of Liddell, Scott, Jones. The first edition of 1843 was based on Franz Passau's Handwerkerbuch der griechischen Sprache of 1831, which itself drew on Johann Schneider's Griechisch-Deutsches Wörterbuch of 1805 to 19. And here we see one of the weaknesses of this kind of dictionary making, and hence a weakness of LSJ. If you base yourself on your predecessors, the structure of an article may remain unchanged. Old material may be taken on trust and not re-examined. Supplementary material is apt to be added piecemeal. Translations sometimes live on in English that has become antiquated. The other way, plan B, is to start again from scratch. First, gather your own material by reading the texts afresh. Enter the material on slips of paper, and then put the slips in order. This was the method of Dr. Johnson, whose Dictionary of the English Language was the product of his own unaided reading, though he needed 6 helpers to copy the quotations he had marked in his books, and it took him 8 years. This was the method of the Oxford Latin Dictionary, which employed in all 17 editors over a period of 35 years. You see the name of John Chadwick, 3rd from the foot of the left-hand column. Above all, this was the method of the Oxford English Dictionary, which employed an army of volunteer readers and took 70 years. Before I get on to more serious matters, I can't resist a diverting anecdote. Do you know how the Oxford English Dictionary got off the ground? In 1859, the Philological Society of London put out an advertisement calling for volunteers to cooperate in a project for reading the whole of English literature. The readers were to note down usages of lexicographical interest in the works assigned to them, and they were to send them on slips of paper to the editor, James Murray. And here is James Murray in his scriptorium in Oxford. There was one particular reader, Dr. William Chester Minor, who sent in his slips with regularity over some 20 years and covered a vast amount of literature, and made contributions of the highest quality and perceptiveness. Eventually, James Murray decided that he would like to make the acquaintance of his unknown correspondent and thank him personally for his efforts. But Dr. Minor, whenever Murray invited him to Oxford, politely offered his regrets and said that he was unable to travel. So one day in 1896, Murray took the train from Oxford to the address in the village of Crowthorne in Berkshire, from which Dr. Minor had addressed his contributions. He came to a huge mansion, and the servant who opened the door ushered him into an imposing study, where stood a solemn gentleman. Murray bowed gravely and said, "I am honored to meet you, sir, and to thank you for the many years of service which you have rendered to the English Dictionary." The man replied, "I fear, sir, that you are mistaken. The gentleman whom you wish to meet is a resident here, and has been for more than 20 years. I am the superintendent of this institution, the Broadmoor Asylum for the criminally insane." And so they went to Dr. Minor's book-lined cell, and the sad history of the lexicographer came out. He was an American who had served as a surgeon in the Civil War. He'd been traumatized by the work which he'd been obliged to perform and the casualties in that conflict. After the war, he emigrated to England. And one dark night, in the streets of Victorian London, he killed a man for reasons which never became clear. You will find his name given a place of honor in the page of acknowledgements prefixed to the Oxford English Dictionary. And you can read his story in a wonderful book by Simon Winchester, The Surgeon of Crowthorne. So to return to my question, why have we taken 24 years? Because as soon as work began, it became clear that the plan as originally conceived was unworkable. The Intermediate Lexicon of 1889 was even less satisfactory than we and John Chadwick had imagined. It could not be revised. Plan A It would have to be completely rewritten. Plan B. Following John Chadwick's sudden death in 1998, the faculty board agreed that we should compile a new and independent lexicon. This would still be of intermediate size and designed primarily to meet the needs of modern students. But it would also be designed to be of interest to scholars, insofar as it would be based upon a fresh reading of the Greek texts and on principles differing from those of LSJ. It was originally planned as a single volume of 1,200 pages, but it has finally grown to over 1,500 and will be published in 2 volumes. The intermediate lexicon has 900 pages, so we are larger by about 70%. Happily, we didn't need to employ an army of volunteer readers because we could call on help from other sources. And those sources are no less American than Dr. Minor. First, we were fortunate in engaging the support of the Perseus Project, based in Tufts University in Massachusetts. Using the resources of the Perseus Digital Library, an American colleague helped us to create an electronic database containing the corpus of texts to be covered, with each word in its context and matched with an accompanying translation. In time, this resource was supplemented and superseded by another, the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae at Irvine. For the first time in the history of lexicography, it was possible to find every word of the press of a computer key and to examine that word in its context. For composing entries in the lexicon, we developed a new technology of our own, a tagging or coding system in XML, extensible markup language. This is a very complex system, using over 100 different tags, and is tailor-made to suit the distinctive style of the lexicon's entries. It is largely the brainchild of our own number, Bruce Fraser. So what is distinctive about our lexicon? I've tabulated its distinctive features under 8 headings. I'll first explain these headings and then illustrate them from entries in the lexicon. First, author coverage. The coverage of the lexicon extends from Homer to the early 2nd century AD, ending with Plutarch's Lives. We include all the major authors who fall within that period, and most of the minor ones, and many new texts unknown to LSJ, such as Sappho and Menander, texts which have turned up on papyri in recent years. In all, we feature about 37,000 Greek words used by about 90 different authors. Organization of entries. We don't organize entries according to chronological or grammatical criteria, as LSJ normally does. In other words, we don't automatically start with Homer or with the active voice before getting to the middle or passive, or put constructions with the accusative before constructions with the genitive or dative. Instead, we organize entries according to meaning. We aim to show the developing senses of words and the relationships between those senses. So we begin with the root sense of a word, which may well appear not in the earliest author who uses that word, but in a later author. And then in numbered sections, we trace its different applications in the different contexts in which it appears. We'll see examples of this in a moment. Introductory summaries. For some longer entries, especially verbs, we give an introductory summary to show the reasoning behind the grouping or sequence of the numbered sections. Again, we'll see examples of this shortly. Definitional phrases. Where necessary, we give explanatory definitional phrases in addition to translations. What, you may ask, is the difference between a definition and a translation? A definition describes the general sense of a word, and it may be applicable to that word in a variety of contexts. A translation reflects the meaning of the word in a specific context. On the page, we make a visual distinction between these two by giving the definition in Roman font, the translation in bold. Again, we shall see this soon. Author labels. We don't give precise references to specific passages, such as Euripides Medea 243, but use author abbreviations alone. You see them in the left-hand column of the author list. And we use some collective labels for groups of authors. For example, Homer, abbreviated as Home, covers both Iliad and Odyssey. Attic orators, abbreviated, refers to 3 or more orators. Lyric, abbreviated, to 3 or more lyric poets. Tragedy, abbreviated, to all 3 of ASE, that is Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And for the most part, we don't give Greek quotations. Now, the omission of specific references and the omission of Greek quotations may seem surprising. And it is perhaps our most striking change from LSJ. So let me explain our reasons. If you cite a single specific passage to illustrate a word or usage, you run the risk, by being so selective, of giving a partial or distorted picture. And if you quote such a passage without translating it, as LSJ often does, you're doing no favors to the learner. Whenever we do give a Greek quotation, we always translate it. Just consider what we gain by omitting specific references and quotations. We gain a great deal of additional space for material of a more helpful kind. We can refer to a much wider range of passages, and we can give more detail about the contexts. This is what is referred to by the heading Added Contextual Material. The penultimate heading is cross-references. We make liberal use of cross-references. Here is a page consisting of little else. I've highlighted the 2 examples of the form ersan. A student who encounters this form needs to be guided to both of the verbs to which the form belongs. And finally, we use contemporary English. We don't call blauter, like the Intermediate Lexicon, a kind of slipper worn by fops. Nor do we translate krokotos, like LSJ, as a saffron-colored robe worn by gay women. And what of the words which brought a blush to Victorian cheeks? Liddell and Scott could have claimed, in the words of Edward Gibbon, "My English is chaste, and all licentious passages are left in the obscurity of a learned language. We spare no blushes." We don't translate the chesdo as ease oneself, do one's need. We define it as to defecate and translate it as to shit. Nor do we explain bineo as inire, coire, of illicit intercourse, but simply translate it by the F word. Nor do we translate the verb laikasdo as to wench, but define it as perform fellatio and translate it by an expression which is so crude that I'd better leave it on the printed page. I'll illustrate the features which I've been describing by reference to 3 entries. For an adjective, a noun, and a verb, I've chosen 3 very common words familiar to everyone. First, the adjective kalos. If someone asks you to say what it means in one English word, you will probably say beautiful. Fair enough. But you need to consider what kinds of noun the adjective is applied to, and whether it is necessary to introduce other translations that suit them better. And once you look at this word in its contexts, you will see how many different shades of meaning it can have. Before we get to the meanings, our article starts by giving a small amount of information relating to dialect, spelling, and vowel length. The ordinary feminine termination, for example, in the Attic and Ionic dialects, is eta, air. But in other dialects, it is a long alpha, ah. It has a different accent in the Aeolic dialect. And in verse from Homer onwards, its first vowel alpha may be scanned as long, Carlos. Then we give the comparative and superlative forms. The comparative normally has a short iota, Kalion. But in Attic, the iota is long, Kalion. And so we come to the meanings. We begin with a definition in Roman font, beautiful in appearance. That is the root sense of the adjective, the sense from which all other senses are derived. The adjective is applied in this sense to humans, deities, animals, their bodies. 3 translation words are offered in bold font, not just beautiful, but also handsome and good-looking. This use is so common that a bare Homer plus is all we need. Then in section 2, we bring in a different type of noun, places and features of the natural world. The original definition is still applicable, but not all of the original translations will suit. So we bring in a different one, fair. Then in section 3, we move from natural things to created things. In section 4, we move away from beauty of appearance to beauty of sound. Then we move away from beauty altogether to a more general sense, for which the rather elaborate explanatory definition reads, as a term of general commendation of things or circumstances good in terms of quality, practical usefulness, or capacity to satisfy or give pleasure. And we offer three translations: good, excellent, fine. And here for the first time, we introduce a new author label as an ironical use appears from the tragic poets onwards. Then in section 6, some applications of this sense in specific circumstances. Then in 7 and 8, some uses of the neuter in verbal or prepositional phrases. And you'll notice that our translations are now in italic. This is because we're translating a phrase, not a single word. Then in 9, we move to something decidedly new, when the adjective acquires a moral connotation in applications to things said or done. And in 10, we have a specific development of this use, when it is paired with agathos, good, but not before Herodotus, to describe a particular type of man, occasionally woman, who combines various types of excellence. Fine and good, upstanding, decent. And this pairing becomes so much a part of ordinary usage that it can even be applied to places or manufactured items. An island, an oil flask. Now let's take a noun. Care, hand. Not the most exciting of nouns, you may think. How can we possibly make it interesting? We've tried. The first section deals with the physical hand. It illustrates some of the commonly recurring circumstances in which the hand is used. In a couple of instances, it is used metonymically. That is, it stands for the action in which it is used. Because it is clasped in making a pledge, to clasp hands, it can be used to mean pledge. Because it is raised in voting, to raise the hand, it can be used to mean vote. Then in section 2, we find that it often means more than hand. It can also refer to the forearm, as well as the hand. So it can actually mean arm. Notice that hand and forearm, as the definition, is in Roman font, while the translation arm is in bold. It's often modified, section 3, by the adjective akara, literally at the tip. And then it becomes either the tip of the arm, that is the hand or fingers, or the tip of the hand, that is the fingertips. Notice again the use of italics because we're translating a phrase. Sometimes, section 4, it describes an object resembling or functioning as a hand or arm, such as a cavalryman's gauntlet or a grapnel on a warship. And the lyric poet Timotheus uses it figuratively, that is, metaphorically, in calling a ship's oars its arms. Then, section 5, hand is used to denote a side of the body, often with the adjectives right and left. For illustration of this, we refer the reader to the appropriate sections of the articles on those two adjectives, aristeros and dexios. Hand may also be used, section 6, as an indication of nearness in prepositional phrases, meaning close at hand. Also, section 7, to signify engagement in an activity, to have in hand. Or section 9, as the instrument of possession or control, to fall into someone's hands. Or of violence, section 10, to lay hands on. Then, developing from the hand as a symbol of strength in section 12, we find it in a concrete sense in 13, of a body of people, especially soldiers, possessing a collective strength, that is, a band of men or a military force. And because the hand is also an agent of manufacture, section 16, it is used concretely, just once, of a manufactured item, a piece of handiwork. And finally, because we write with our hand, it is used in another concrete sense of a person's handwriting, again just once, in the orator Hyperides. My third example is the verb echo, one of the commonest Greek verbs, whose basic senses are have and hold. Our entry for this verb runs to 55 sections. Oh dear, you'll be thinking, we're not going to trawl through 55 different meanings, are we? No, we're not. I simply want to make one general point. If a verb has as many applications as this, you need to provide the reader with signposts to show how you've organized the material, to show that you've organized the numbered sections in groups, and to show that these groups follow logically one from the other. So here is our initial summary of the groups. We move from the physical, sections 1 to 3, hold by physical contact, to the less physical, section 4, hold in one's possession, then to the non-physical, beginning in section 15, as for example, have thoughts or have consequences. And this development is marked by a shift of sense from hold to have. There's also a distinct group from section 29 onwards, in which the sense is hold back, constrain or restrain. And finally, there's a group of intransitive uses and a group of uses in the middle voice. This introductory summary makes it easier for the reader to navigate through what is a very long and complex article. Let's put one page of our article side by side with the corresponding page of LSJ. Here's LSJ on the right, 2 columns of densely packed material, with little to guide you through it. The labyrinth of Minos was more easily penetrable than many an article of LSJ. Samuel Johnson defined the lexicographer as a harmless drudge. Houseman mocked the compilers of the Thesauros Linguae Latinae as the chain gangs working at the ergastulum in Munich. And a certain Herodicus of Babylon in the 2nd century BC coined a memorable couplet, Gonia bombukes, bumblers in corners, monosyllaboi, masters of the monosyllable, oisimemele, whose concern is with tospin, kaispuin, kaitomin, editonin, spin versus spoin, min versus nin. I and my colleagues have bumbled in corners. We have drudged. We have labored in the ergastulum in Sidgwick. But I hope that we have created something which will be of service to students and scholars, and in which the faculty and all those many others who have helped, supported, and encouraged us through these long years may take some pride.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was rich, stimulating, and inimitably presented as well. It was quite wonderful, quite an experience. I'm sure there will be floods of questions. Probably the simplest way to do things, what we've ended up doing in the faculty generally, is if people just type the word Q into the chat on the right, and that will signal to me that you have a question to ask. Yes, they're coming in already. Simon Prelane.
Yes, thank you very much. That was simply wonderful. Thank you. Could I ask about, I mean, this is a sort of drudgy etymological question, but you were talking about how you begin with the root sense, which of course might well not be the earliest attested sense. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, it will differ from word to word what you're looking for as the root sense. Usually, if a word has a physical and a non-physical sense, as I illustrated with care, you start with the physical sense. That is much more likely to be the root one. It's something that you've just got to try out with every single word, but it becomes clear to you once you've examined all the material what the basic root sense is going to be.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I was simply thinking sort of how far you look outside Greek, if at all. I was looking at your echo, and you begin with hold by physical contact. And I mean, I don't know what, I mean, have and hold are rather interesting things, but I assume you think that having something might be something where I say, oh, I've got that book in the sense that it's over there, but I don't actually have it in my hand. And so you've come to the view that having it in your hand is somehow prior to, you might say, having it in your broader control. And if you look outside Greek, one does find that there are, you know, words or that suggest that that's the thing. There's a physical word for force in Sanskrit that's a cognate for it. I wondered if you'd just looked outside Greek or rather taken a view within Greek. That's really what I was getting at.
Well, I don't think we've looked too far outside Greek.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. John Wilkins.
Hello, John.
Hello, James. As Tim said, your style is quite inimitable. I wanted to ask, you criticize every now and then LSJ, and I remember that John Raven was very critical of what they'd done with botanical terms in using Thistleton Dyer. And I wondered what your policy was in dealing with botanical terms, or indeed bird terms, which you also mentioned, and how, to what extent you try and identify them with a modern species and how you do that.
Yes, we certainly try to identify birds. There's plenty of reliable literature on that. I mean, Arnott, for example, and one or two others. As for botanical terms, we don't cover the botanical works of Theophrastus. We cover only the characters. If you start covering very technical works like Theophrastus's botanical works, you find yourself accumulating an enormous number of words that don't appear in other authors. And we decided right at the beginning that we were going to concentrate on the authors or their texts which provided the words that were going to be most encountered by students.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Over to Steve Walton.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. You mentioned the collaboration with Perseus as part of the project. And I wondered if there was any thought of producing an electronic version of the dictionary. And if so, whether there'll be a link with Perseus in the same way that LSJ is currently linked with it.
Yes, indeed. This was part of our original arrangement with Perseus. They gave us an enormous amount of technical help in creating our initial database. And in return, we have undertaken to allow them to make use of the lexicon online. When this will appear, I don't know, but it's something to look forward to.
Thank you.
We do have a question from Michael Theophilos in the chat. What have the editors done with documentary texts? Have you included documentary papyri?
No, we don't cover documentary papyri or indeed epigraphical material. We cover just the literature, the literary authors who are likely to be used by students. So for documentary papyri, epigraphical texts, you've got to go to LSJ. It was never our intention to supersede LSJ. There's still a lot there that you need to consult in the big lexicon.
And we have another question from B. Hofstetter, which is, this reminds me of Louvre and Nieder's New Testament dictionary based on semantic domains. Was there any consideration of that?
No, we do include parts of the New Testament. We limit our coverage to Gospels and Acts. We decided that we couldn't cover everything because it would entail including a very large amount of material which doesn't appear elsewhere, words and sentences, and that this was best left to the specialist New Testament lexica. So I can't say that we're following any methodology that you might find in New Testament lexica, although for the parts of the New Testament that we have covered, we have used such lexica.
The questions are flooding in on the chat bar, which seems to be the place to go, but feel free to either do that or to queue. But Matteo DeFranco asks, sorry, I've skipped one out actually. Kai Broderson asks, later versions of LSJ and others included personal names and etymologies. Have you included personal names?
No, we don't include personal names. Well, except for, we include all author names, and we include a lot of historical names, but we don't cover names that don't appear in the literary texts.
And do you give etymologies for these names?
No. Normally we don't, because it's rather a dubious exercise trying to etymologize personal names.
Thank you.
And Matteo DeFranco asks, who is the latest author you've included? I think you said Plutarch, but that may not be.
Yes, Plutarch's Lives. We decided not to include the other works of Plutarch, the Moralia. There would have just been far too much material there. We wanted to go much further with our prose authors than to show that Greek prose doesn't finish with the Emeritus, for example. So we decided that we'd go down as far as Plutarch, limiting ourselves to the Lives, because they're the part of Plutarch that is likely to be read by students. We also threw in Polybius, and as I've mentioned, we put in parts of the New Testament. It may have been a mistake to put in Polybius because there's an awful lot of him and he's not really very good, is he? He's dreadfully boring in content and his use of language is pretty disappointing too. But we decided to cover him, so we have. So you'll find that he is featured fully.
Well, as someone who's spent a lot of time in Roman Greek material, I have to say it's very, very much appreciated that you've done Plutarch at least systematically, because LSJ is pretty ropey in some of these areas. Okay, another question. I think this is more of a comment. Very impressive work. Congratulations to everyone involved. As a lexicographer, I'm in awe. As a Greek, I feel thankful. So it's a tribute. Greg Rowe asks about the Septuagint.
Oh no, we don't touch the Septuagint.
Donna Shalev asks whether Galen is included, presumably not on chronological grounds.
No, we don't cover Galen. Again, if we try to do that, our task would have been enormous. Yes, even more enormous. And again, it would have included a lot of technical vocabulary that would not have been so of great use to students.
Did you, just going back to the question of Jewish Greek material, did you do Philo, for example, and Josephus?
No, no, we haven't done those.
Okay. Andrew Brown asks, has the Brill Greek dictionary had any impact on your work? I was wondering about Montanari and whether that's a competitor and whether it's compiled according to the same principles.
No, the Brill dictionary is a translation essentially of the Latin, the Italian dictionary, whose main editor was Franco Montanari, using a vast army of collaborators. And what they did was essentially to copy LSJ and digest and abbreviate it. They didn't read the texts afresh. Therefore, they perpetuate many of the deficiencies and mistakes of LSJ. So we didn't make any use of Montanari or the Brill version.
Thank you, James. Laurie Marks has a question.
So you've said that you've described this as being of intermediate length. Just hypothetically, if you or if someone were in future to prepare a full-length one, a successor to the full LSJ, but based on this new dictionary and its methods, as a rough estimate, how many more years of work do you think that would take and how many pages would it be?
It would take several lifetimes. You would have to have a large number of people and you would have to have a large amount of money available. I mean, if you think of the Portuguese dictionary, which has attempted to do something on an even grander scale than LSJ, they haven't got beyond, what is it, the letter beta, gamma? and of course they're running short of money. You just could not do anything now on the scale of LSJ unless you had a large team of very qualified people and an enormous pot of money to pay them.
So how many years has it taken them to get as far as beta?
Oh, 30 maybe.
Thank you.
Yes, well, this is beginning to sound a little bit like the origin story of the Septuagint translation itself. Jeremiah Bailey asks, part of the popularity of the middle little you are hoping to replace is its affordability. Do you know anything yet about the price for the lexicon?
Yes, it's going to cost £64.99, and it's a bargain at that price.
And that'll be hardback, presumably.
Oh yes, it's only in hardback. In a beautifully cased set of 2 volumes.
Well, normally we'd be selling them at the foyer outside, but unfortunately we can't do that today. Bryant asks, it appears that the lexicon covers classical literature with some New Testament, Gospels and Acts, but not the Septuagint, the Epistles, Revelation, and the early Church Fathers. Are you leaving out Koine Greek?
Well, insofar as the parts of the New Testament which we covered are Koine, no, we're not leaving out Koine Greek. And I mean, Polybius is on the way to Koine too.
Elizabeth Van Diver, hello Elizabeth, asks about the novels, but presumably again on chronological grounds, no longer Achilles Tatius or Heliodorus.
No, unfortunately, we don't cover the novelists.
No, again, I suppose it's a matter of scale, isn't it? Once you get into the 2nd century,
yes.
It's just so much more material. Sarah Tirito asks, concerning the context, how did you manage the chronological evolution of the meaning of some terms? For example, polis.
Polis. Well, you've simply got to survey the whole field, and you get a feel for it then, and it should emerge what the hierarchy in terms of meaning and other things is. You can't lay down any hard and fast rule.
I suppose that question points to another question, which is, how do you relate the root versus developed meaning that you're proposing here, where you say there's an original meaning, there's the root meaning. It's not necessarily chronologically the first meaning, but this is the root meaning, and the other ones are later or conceptually later developments of that. How do you reconcile that model with real chronology when terms, for example, political terms, are evolving throughout time? Are they the same thing, or is there a root meaning of polis that is separate from the chronological priority, chronologically prior meaning?
I think with a political term like polis, then the historical chronology is likely to prevail.
Thank you. Lynn Wolfenden says, congratulations from Australia, James. This is a mammoth achievement of which you and your team should feel extremely proud. I'm sure we all echo that. Hal Friedrichs asks, will it also be available on the TLG website?
We haven't discussed that. It's conceivable, but I have no information on that.
I think that is probably the last question. We do have a couple of people joining us now, which suggests that they may have got the time zone wrong. So I'm sorry, I don't think James is going to repeat his presentation then. Oh, we do have one more question from Lucio Valletta. As an Italian scholar, my first impression is that the Cambridge Greek Lexicon compared to LSJ is quite similar to the Italian edition of Montanari's dictionary compared to the previous Lorenzo Rocci one. Well, you spoke earlier about Montanari and the differences as you understood it. So you're saying that your difference is that whereas Montanari was fundamentally following the model that you were talking about earlier, where people base their lexica on previous lexica, yours is the first one from scratch in this batch, at least.
Yes, that is an essential difference between us and the real Montanari lexicon.
We do actually have one wrap-up question, which is from Chris Lawrence. How many hapax legomena are there, and which is your favorite?
Oh, I wish I knew, Chris. I can't answer that.
I bet if we had Simon Westrip here, he'd be able to answer that.
Yeah, he might.
Okay, well, at that point, I think it's probably time to let James go and let's give him a big virtual clap once again. And thank him very much for a hugely entertaining and very informative evening. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. As I say, lovely to see so many old friends, to make new virtual friends. Do stay in touch. Contact Greg Baldwin, if you want to go on our mailing list. We do have these events every month, and we're going to carry on going. So throughout the calendar year, we hope. So yes, just keep on joining us, and good luck, everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and see you soon.